Hello, everyone. This is Charles Mauro. Happy to be part of this panel today for the IPO Design Protection section. Um, just want to make sure everything is clear. Okay, so my talk today is essentially about GUI design and what history of GUI design tells us about the protection of these increasingly important innovations. These are aspects of technology that have become extremely important in the development of not only commercial success of major corporations, but also other entities as well. Briefly, the definition of a graphical user interface is a computer program that enables a person to communicate with a computer through the use of symbols, visual metaphors, and pointing devices. So this is also known as previous to the graphical user interface, there was what was known technically as text-driven interfaces, and that's where you would text commands into keyboards for the purpose of controlling the man-machine system interface for computers. And the GUI was a major innovation, a major breakthrough for these types of systems. Briefly, some of the components, most of you are familiar with the basic components of a graphical user interface. This is the Xerox Star, the original design from 1981. This was the first original patent. Just one second. And as I was mentioning, the direct manipulation is either by a mouse, but it can also be by the iPhone type of interface or direct manipulation interface. Just hold on one second here. Okay, so for this slight delay there. So anyway, the critical point about a graphical user interface is basically that it allows direct manipulation of individual objects on the screen, and it was a major technological innovation. And when we look at protecting the GUI as a structural concept in the overall sort of user interface design space, it's important to understand the history of GUI development. And here essentially is a brief history of the critical milestones in GUI development. Douglas Engelbart actually is given primary credit for development of the GUI. His famous demo at Stanford in 1968 demonstrated all of the primary concepts of the graphical user interface. That was followed in roughly 73 by the adoption of these concepts by Xerox in the form of the Alto, then the Xerox Star, and the first, what I would characterize as widely commercially available GUI was the Apple Lisa, followed by the Mac, and then followed in very shortly by MS Windows. Major milestone in GUI design was the Apple Newton, which was the first sort of miniaturized interface. And then the GUI as a structural concept for interface design really took a major turn with the introduction of the iPhone, the introduction of the Apple App Store and the SDK, which is the development methodology for Apple, and Android has the same sort of structural concept. Then the introduction of the Google Glass, product that's fallen by the wayside currently, but it was a major innovation in GUI because it allowed direct manipulation through eye movements. Then followed closely in 2015 by the Apple Watch. And what's next is really probably more a function of how voice is used to enhance GUI interfaces than basic updates to the GUI itself. So across the bottom here we have the major litigation events, the original Xerox Star patents, the Apple Microsoft litigation, the USPTO ruling allowing GUI design patents, and of course then the seminal case in GUI design, Apple, Samsung, in approximately 2011. So what I want to point out is that this major section here, from the introduction of the iPhone through the introduction of the Apple Watch, really presented the first extremely dramatic growth in the number of GUI type interfaces. So if we look briefly at the growth in the number of devices employing GUI design concepts, and these are actual on the vertical scale as billions of interfaces. The GUI is probably the most widely utilized form of basic technology for interacting with machines today. We had this inflection point with the introduction of the iPhone, the App Store, the Apple SDK, and also the introduction of simplified software development tools. So what we see now is just, it's almost a vertical line in terms of the application of GUI devices. And this, of course, took a big turn further with the introduction of the Apple Watch and wearables. So there are really 6 vectors that are impacting GUI uptake and IT protection. The trend in virtual migration, this means movement from hardware to screen-based interfaces. This is a trend that is only accelerating. The rapid development of user experience design as a formal discipline. Today, my clients have more UX designers on staff than they have industrial designers. And UX stands for user experience, but basically what it involves is the interface design. A lot of that work relates to GUI design and optimization. Of course, the primary vector in growth was the iPhone, the App Store, and I've already gone over this briefly. The 4th vector would be the introduction of cross-platform GUI design. And this is where, for the first time, GUIs were developed first on the desktop, then on a mobile device, and now on a wearable device. So it's this cross-platform GUI design migration is also a major vector in the increase in the importance of GUI. Dramatic simplification in GUI development tools is now possible for relatively inexperienced programmers to develop quite sophisticated GUI designs based on the refinement of these new tools by Adobe and other companies. And then, of course, the dramatic increase in the value of GUI as a brand development equity identifying aspect of design. So, the basic point here is that these vectors of change behind GUI are marching forward in a way that's very aggressive and important. Critical insights that I would leave with my colleagues who are IT professionals that are aiding in GUI design protection. And this is, based on my personal experience and research conducted by my team. There's actually very minimal awareness of IP in the GUI development space. There are about 25 programs that offer degrees in UX design. And check of those programs, not one single program has either a course or a lecture on IP. So there's a dramatic lack of awareness of IP in the GUI development space. The software tools make design changes frequent and unpredictable. And we all know that, as IP experts and as attorneys, we hate surprises when we're halfway through a filing and we see a completely new GUI structure. The current IP framework is probably poorly matched to the attributes of GUI. This is a general philosophical point that I'd like to make, and what we really need is a new framework that accommodates innovation around interaction. Products covered under traditional design patent are relatively static entities, but GUI is a much different problem. Another critical problem is that distributed team development makes attribution extremely difficult. My clients have teams in India, in China, in Denver, Colorado, in San Francisco, in New York. And these teams, it's very difficult to assign attribution as to who was the actual inventor of what. And, this runs somewhat counter to the philosophy of good IP, this whole idea that agile software development is running very rapidly, and these changes are made without proper controls. And there's increasing use of SDKs. SDK is a structured framework provided by Apple and Android and other platforms that require that you use certain physical elements of their design vocabulary. So it makes it difficult to parse what elements are standardized SDK elements, which cannot be protected, and the actual innovation elements themselves. And finally, I would add here that GUI is the single largest market for IP services in the future. There's nothing that is even close to the amount of development that is taking place in industrial design, physical product design, that begins to match the development of GUI and UX design. It's a massive and rapidly growing market. And I would like to just finish with the success likely depends on new IP methods and legislation. And if you're, an IP professional, an attorney, you're going to have to go out and get this work because there's simply very minimal awareness, except in the largest corporations, at Apple, at Google, for example, with respect to the benefits of IT protections. So thank you, and I'd like now to pass the session on to Tracy Durkin.